Jordan, we were talking about sex self-identification changes or proposed reforms in New Zealand. You said, firstly, it's a tiny number of people affected. And secondly, you say we need to think it through. In what way?
Well, one of the things that's happened, for example, so really what this is an attempt by a certain ideological movement to put forth the insistence that sex is only a sociological construct, that it's only something learned, and so that it can be changed at whim, which is also a strange thing, because if it's learned, it can't really be changed at whim. And also, if it's learned, it could be unlearned, which is something that the people who are putting this legislation forward aren't really thinking through, because that opens up the opportunity for people who would like to reform people who would like to change their gender back to, say, normative behavior, because if it's learned, it can be unlearned. But more importantly, sex roles are not only learned, they're partly learned. And there's plenty of biological differences between men and women. And many of them aren't trivial. Like, men and women are more the same than they are different. But the differences are quite marked at the extremes. And so what we're seeing partly as a consequence of this now is the movement of, say, trans women into female sports. You saw this in Minnesota just the other day. I think it was Minnesota, where a newly transitioned trans woman has been shattering the weightlifting records for women's
and
sports
indeed,
in
we've had
Minnesota.
this issue here with a Commonwealth Games competitor who was a former male.
Yes, well, it's absolutely insane. You know, I mean, first, the fact that it's allowed to begin with is beyond comprehension. It's a real sign of cultural insanity. And the second is that psychologically, it's almost incomprehensible. I can't imagine how you could be a man who transformed himself into a woman in all the ways that that's possible, and then decided to go compete in a high-level sports arena with women who've been training their whole lives to hit the peak of their ability, and then to absolutely bloody demolish them, say, after a year of work, and then to tout that as some sort of victory for the oppressed. It's completely, it's narcissistic beyond comprehension. And it's a sign of what happens when you don't carefully think things through. All sorts of unexpected consequences tend to manifest themselves. And you see the same thing happening now with rapid onset gender dysphoria and the treatment of very young people with very powerful hormonal and surgical techniques designed to permanently alter their psychophysiological structure. And we're going to pay for this in a big way in 15 years when these kids grow up and hit adulthood and start tossing out lawsuits, as they certainly will and should. We're going to look back and wonder just exactly what the hell was wrong with us. So it's driven by this ideology that's been formulated by people like Judith Butler, who absolutely insist, because they have no biological knowledge whatsoever, that all the differences between men and women are socially constructed.
And it's just,
which is absolutely not true.
True, absolutely.
Man born in a woman's body. It's like, well, is that a biologically determinist argument? Yes or no? So what are we saying? You can be a man born in a woman's body, and that's biological, but if you're a woman born in a woman's body, that's socially constructed. It's like, really? That's supposed to be an argument? It's beyond preposterous. So,
at the same time, in the US, of course, the new Trump bill, which considers to narrowly define gender as something that's immutable and that's totally based on genitalia at birth, is now a potential law. So if you had to choose between these two laws, which one would you pick?
Well, if you're transgendered, is it immutable?
I don't know.
Right. Neither does anyone else. And so there's tremendous incoherencies in the theory. So at the moment, for example, it's perfectly reasonable to formulate the proposition, and this is very characteristic of let's say, the ideological types who drove Bill C-16, to say you can be a man born in a woman's body, which is a biologically determinist argument, and to say that gender is socially constructed, and to say that it's a personal choice. It's like, sorry, all three of those things cannot simultaneously be true. So there's going to be a variety of legislative responses to that, but mostly it's just incoherent. And I also think that it's driven by something deeper. It's driven, at least in part, by the desire to destabilize traditional perceptual and cognitive categories. And I see that as part of an assault on the idea of categorization itself that's been undertaken with a fair bit of success in the university since the 1970s. And so generally speaking, I'm opposed to such things. I don't believe that introducing confusion about gender identity into the lives of young people at an early age is going to have a net positive consequence. We'll see, but I doubt it. So here's the argument. Biological sex, gender identity, gender expression, and sexual preference are independent. Okay? They're not. The definition of dependent is that there's a strong statistical relationship between them. Could be correlational, could be causal. It is, in fact, causal. It's also correlational. But it's an unbelievably tight linkage so that the overwhelming majority of people who are a particular biological sex identify with that sex. It's 99.97%. Okay? The overwhelming majority of people who are of a given biological sex and an isomorphic gender identity express their gender in accordance with those two fundamental elements of their identity. And that would be more, perhaps something in the range of 95%, assuming that 1 in 20 is playing with fashion and self-presentation in a gender-bending manner, which is not uncommon. That's been going on for a very long time. And then of the people who are of a given biological sex, the isomorphic gender identity, and who present themselves that way, the overwhelming majority are heterosexual. That is not independent. It's the very opposite of independent, even though that's now the law. And then the other element is there is a strong element of biological proclivity along all of those dimensions. Now, it's not complete. Obviously, anyone with any sense understands that people are quite mutable in their self and cultural presentation. I mean, we are creatures with long developmental histories, and we can learn. But the idea that biology doesn't play a strong role in influencing phenomena at every one of those levels of analysis is absolutely preposterous. And that's pushed very hard by the social constructionists. And I think that's reprehensible. It flies in the face of anything reasonably defined as fact. And it does no one any favors. Well, not least because you can't say, well, you're a man born in a woman's body. It's like, well, is that a biologically determinist argument? Yes or no? So what are we saying? You can be a man born in a woman's body, and that's biological, but if you're a woman born in a woman's body, that's socially constructed. It's like, really? That's supposed to be an argument? It's beyond preposterous. So